You know that moment when your phone lights up and it's them, the person who left you confused, the one who said they needed space. You stare at their name and 1,000 memories rush back. You remember how deeply you loved them, how hard you tried to make things work, and how suddenly they pulled away. And now, after all that distance, they're back. Why? Why does someone who avoided closeness suddenly crave connection again? Let's talk about it. Avoidant people, they crave independence like oxygen. They're terrified of losing themselves in love. The moment things start to feel emotionally heavy or too close, they retreat. They convince themselves they need freedom, when in truth, they're running from the intensity of intimacy. But here's the twist. The same walls they build to protect themselves also create emptiness. When that emptiness grows louder than their fear, guess who they think of? The anxious ex. The one who loved deeply, who made them feel wanted, who cared enough to fight for the relationship. You see, anxious partners give what avoidants secretly crave. Emotional warmth, validation, safety. At first, that warmth feels suffocating to an avoidant. Too much, too soon. But once they walk away and the silence sets in, they begin to miss the very thing they once rejected. The texts that used to feel too much suddenly become the comfort they long for. The love that once scared them now feels like home. This cycle keeps spinning because both sides are chasing a feeling that feels familiar but isn't healthy. The anxious partner wants reassurance, the avoidant wants relief from their loneliness, but neither of them is truly secure. They're just trying to fill a void. And that's why the avoidant comes back. Not always out of love, but out of nostalgia for comfort. They want to dip their toes back into the warmth without drowning in the responsibility of staying. So, what's the lesson here? If you've ever been that anxious ex, don't mistake their return for real change. Missing you isn't the same as choosing you. Growth doesn't happen in silence. It happens in awareness, accountability, and consistent effort. If someone left because they feared connection, their return isn't your signal to open your heart. It's your chance to protect it. Love shouldn't feel like you're begging someone to stay. Real love is when both people show up, not when one runs and the other waits. Avoidants are individuals who often appear confident, self-sufficient, and emotionally detached, but beneath that exterior lies a deep fear of intimacy and vulnerability. They crave connection like everyone else, yet when it finally begins to unfold, something within them tenses up. The closeness they once thought they wanted suddenly feels threatening. They start to pull away, convinced that distance will bring them peace, but the truth is their fear of losing independence often overshadows their natural desire for love. It's not that avoidants don't want to love or be loved, they just struggle with the idea of needing someone. To them, needing equals weakness, and weakness equals danger. This belief is usually rooted in early experiences. Perhaps they learned that closeness leads to disappointment, or that love is unpredictable and unsafe. Over time, they learn to survive by shutting down emotionally and relying only on themselves. When an avoidant person begins a relationship, the early stages can feel intoxicating. They enjoy the chase, the novelty, the thrill of connection, but as soon as the relationship begins to demand emotional depth, their inner alarm system activates. Intimacy triggers their subconscious fears of being controlled, consumed, or trapped. They begin to withdraw, subtly at first, taking longer to reply to messages, spending more time alone, avoiding deep conversations. To their partner, it may feel like emotional abandonment, but for the avoidant, it's self-protection. They convince themselves that they just need space, that the relationship is too much or moving too fast. What they're really doing is escaping the discomfort of vulnerability. Ironically, the distance they create to protect themselves soon becomes the very source of their pain. Avoidants often underestimate their need for connection. Once they've pulled away and the dust settles, they find themselves alone with the quiet they thought they wanted. But silence has a way of amplifying truth, and that truth is loneliness. No matter how fiercely they cling to independence, human beings are wired for connection. The very intimacy they flee from is the same force that gives life meaning and emotional security. This internal contradiction, craving love but fearing it, becomes the core struggle for an avoidant. Over time, this fear-driven cycle can leave them emotionally exhausted. They push away partners who try to love them, only to realize that independence doesn't feel as fulfilling as they imagined. When they are away from emotional warmth for too long, they start reminiscing about the connection they lost. They begin to remember the small gestures, the safety of being understood, the comfort of having someone who truly cared. These memories awaken their suppressed longing for closeness. They might even reach out to reconnect, not necessarily because they have changed, but because their emotional hunger has returned. Avoidants often live between two emotional extremes, the fear of being engulfed and the pain of being alone. They crave closeness until it feels too real, and they pull back until loneliness becomes unbearable. This push and pull defines their emotional rhythm. At their core, they desire connection, love, and understanding just as deeply as anyone else. They're simply terrified of the vulnerability it requires. And until they face that fear, they will continue to oscillate between distance and desire, always searching for balance between independence and intimacy, but never fully finding peace in either. Anxious partners are often the emotional anchors in relationships, the ones who love deeply, give endlessly, and crave connection with an intensity that can sometimes overwhelm both themselves and their partner. Their love language is reassurance, not because they are weak, but because they've learned that closeness is the way to feel safe. They pour their heart into relationships, seeking emotional validation and consistency to calm the storm inside them. When they love an avoidant, this emotional generosity becomes both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. Avoidants are drawn to this warmth because it offers something they secretly crave but cannot easily provide for themselves. The safety of being seen, cared for, emotionally held. To an avoidant, the anxious partner's affection feels like sunlight, comforting, healing, and familiar. In the beginning, this warmth feels incredible. The anxious partner's empathy, attentiveness, and eagerness to connect make the avoidant feel special and desired. For someone who has spent most of their life building walls, this kind of love can feel like home. But as the relationship deepens and expectations of emotional closeness rise, the same warmth that once felt nurturing begins to feel suffocating. The avoidant starts to interpret this emotional closeness as pressure, mistaking love for control, care for demand, and intimacy for loss of autonomy. Meanwhile, the anxious partner senses the shift immediately. They feel the emotional distance growing and try to bridge it through even more love, more communication, more effort. But to the avoidant, every attempt at reassurance feels like a tightening grip, and so they pull back further. What neither side realizes in that moment is that both are reacting from fear. One fears losing connection, the other fears losing freedom. The anxious person's instinct to cling only reinforces the avoidant's instinct to run, and the avoidant's withdrawal only deepens the anxious person's sense of abandonment. It's a painful loop, one that feeds itself until one person finally breaks away. When the avoidant eventually leaves, they convince themselves they need space to breathe. Yet once they're gone, something shifts. The silence that follows may initially feel like relief, but as time passes, the avoidant starts to feel the absence of the emotional warmth they once took for granted. They remember how their anxious ex made them feel alive, desired, and emotionally secure. That steady supply of affection and reassurance, which once felt overwhelming, now feels like something they can't find elsewhere. The avoidant may not fully understand why, but they start missing the very person they thought they needed distance from. For the anxious partner, this can be confusing and even painful. They may interpret the avoidant's return as a sign of lasting love, but often it's more about comfort than commitment. The avoidant is drawn back to the emotional safety net the anxious partner provides, the nurturing presence that helps them momentarily escape their loneliness. This cycle can repeat itself many times, each return reigniting hope in the anxious partner and temporary relief in the avoidant. The anxious person's love becomes a refuge from the avoidant's emotional emptiness, but not a solution to it. The deeper truth is that the anxious partner embodies what the avoidant secretly longs for. Someone who can love them through their walls, who can remind them of the softness they keep hidden beneath their defenses. Yet until the avoidant learns to face their fear of intimacy, that warmth will always feel like both a gift and a threat. The anxious partner's love shines too brightly for someone still afraid of being seen, and so the dance continues. Love offered, love withdrawn, love missed. A tragic rhythm where both partners are searching for the same thing, to feel safe in love without losing themselves. When an avoidant person returns to an anxious ex, it's rarely a straightforward declaration of love or commitment. Often, it's a response to a deep sense of emptiness that can't be filled by independence alone. Avoidants are fiercely protective of their freedom, and yet human beings are wired for connection. Once they've been away from the emotional intensity of their past relationship, they start to notice the absence, the texts they no longer receive, the warmth that no one else provides, the sense of being truly known and valued. Nostalgia sets in, and with it comes the temptation to reconnect. They remember the way their anxious ex cared for them, fought for them, and made them feel like they belonged. These memories stir a longing that can feel almost irresistible, even if they once fled from the same intensity. The return of an avoidant isn't always a signal of change. In many cases, it's about comfort rather than commitment. They seek the emotional safety they once had, without necessarily wanting to face the challenges of sustaining closeness long term. Their approach is often tentative, careful, and sometimes confusing. They might reach out sporadically, checking in with messages or calls, expressing nostalgia or mild regret, but rarely fully confronting the deeper issues that caused the original separation. The anxious partner may interpret this return as a sign of love and growth, but it's crucial to recognize the difference between someone returning to fill a void and someone returning with genuine transformation. This pattern creates a cycle that can be difficult to break. The anxious partner's natural tendency to respond with warmth and openness reinforces the avoidance behavior. The avoidant experiences the comfort they long for without the immediate pressure of emotional closeness, which temporarily satisfies their need for connection. At the same time, the anxious partner may feel validated by the return, seeing it as proof that their love is powerful enough to draw the avoidant back. But this dynamic rarely resolves the underlying issues. The fear of intimacy, the push and pull patterns, the unresolved emotional baggage. It simply prolongs the cycle, allowing both partners to experience temporary relief without achieving lasting growth. When avoidants return, they are often drawn to familiar patterns rather than new experiences. The anxious ex embodies the emotional intensity they once fled from, but also the stability they secretly missed. There is a paradox in their behavior. The very qualities that once felt overwhelming now feel grounding. The emotional energy, the attentiveness, and the care that the avoidant once avoided become sources of reassurance. However, this reassurance is usually short-lived. If the avoidant has not addressed their internal fears and emotional avoidance without introspection and growth, they may repeat the same cycle, drawing close, withdrawing, and returning again whenever loneliness strikes. For the anxious ex, this return can be both flattering and destabilizing. It awakens hope, nostalgia, and longing for what once was. Yet, it's essential to recognize that the avoidance presence is not always an invitation to rebuild a healthy, balanced relationship. It's often a reflection of their own emotional hunger and longing for comfort. Understanding this pattern can help the anxious partner navigate their emotions with clarity, protect their own well-being, and avoid getting caught in a repetitive loop where temporary reunion masks deeper, unresolved relational challenges. The dynamic between avoidant and anxious partners often becomes a repeating cycle because both are reacting from deep-seated fears. Even though those fears manifest differently, the anxious partner fears abandonment, rejection, or not being loved enough. Their instincts push them to seek closeness, reassurance, and constant emotional connection. They often interpret distance as a sign of disinterest or failure in the relationship, which triggers a heightened need to pursue, connect, and secure affection. This relentless pursuit is not about control, but about survival. Emotionally, they feel most secure when they know their partner is engaged and emotionally available. On the other hand, the avoidant partner fears engulfment, loss of freedom, and the vulnerability that comes with intimacy. They often equate closeness with a loss of identity or autonomy. When faced with the intensity of the anxious partner's emotional needs, the avoidant experiences an internal alarm, an instinct to retreat, to protect themselves from being overwhelmed. What feels like affection to the anxious partner can feel like pressure, intrusion, or confinement to the avoidant. Their withdrawal is an attempt to regain a sense of control, but it inadvertently triggers the anxious partner's fears of abandonment, which then increases the pursuit. This creates a feedback loop, a push-pull dynamic that can feel magnetic, yet exhausting for both parties. The more the anxious partner seeks connection, the more the avoidant withdraws, the more the avoidant retreats, the more the anxious partner chases. Each person is acting from a place of fear and unmet needs, not necessarily from a lack of love. Both are trying to cope with the discomfort of intimacy and emotional vulnerability, but they are doing so in opposite ways. The anxious partner wants reassurance and closeness, while the avoidant seeks distance and emotional safety through separation. This push-pull pattern often intensifies over time, leaving both partners feeling misunderstood and frustrated. The anxious partner may question their worth or feel like they are constantly failing to keep the relationship alive. Meanwhile, the avoidant may feel suffocated or resentful, fearing that their independence is under threat. Neither partner truly intends to hurt the other, yet both contribute to a cycle that keeps them emotionally entangled without creating lasting stability or trust. When avoidants return to anxious exes, it is frequently because the emotional pattern is familiar, even comforting in its predictability. The anxious partner's love and consistency provide a sense of stability that the avoidant secretly misses. While the anxious partner may hope the return signals change and growth, both are drawn to the emotional energy that feels familiar, despite the tension it creates. The cycle continues because each partner unconsciously reinforces the other's fears. The anxious partner's pursuit validates the avoidant's need for space, and the avoidant's withdrawal validates the anxious partner's fear of abandonment. Breaking this cycle requires awareness and self-reflection. Both partners need to recognize the patterns at play and understand that their reactions are rooted in fear rather than malice. The anxious partner must learn to manage their need for constant reassurance without chasing, while the avoidant must confront their fear of intimacy and develop the ability to stay present even when closeness feels uncomfortable. Only when both partners address these core issues can they step out of the repetitive cycle, creating a space for healthy communication, mutual understanding, and emotional balance. Healing in the dynamic between anxious and avoidant partners requires a shift from patterns of fear and chasing to a foundation of security and self-awareness. For the anxious partner, this means learning to cultivate emotional stability from within rather than relying solely on external validation. It's about understanding that their worth is not dependent on constant reassurance from someone else, and that their needs are valid, without needing to pressure or chase their partner into fulfilling them. This doesn't mean shutting down emotionally or suppressing love. It means creating boundaries that protect their heart while still allowing space for genuine connection. When an anxious person learns to regulate their own emotional responses, they no longer feel trapped in the cycle of seeking approval or fearing abandonment. They can engage in a relationship from a place of confidence rather than desperation. For the avoidant partner, healing means confronting the fear of intimacy and acknowledging the deep desire for connection that often lies beneath the need for distance. Avoidants must recognize that running away from closeness may provide temporary relief, but it doesn't solve the underlying loneliness or build meaningful relationships. By slowly and intentionally allowing themselves to be vulnerable, they can experience the benefits of emotional presence without feeling engulfed. This requires self-reflection, patience, and a willingness to tolerate discomfort. The ability to stay present, communicate openly, and face emotions head-on is a crucial step toward breaking the habitual cycle of withdrawal. When both partners commit to growth, they begin to transform the relationship from a pattern of fear and pursuit into one of mutual respect, understanding, and secure attachment. The anxious partner learns to trust themselves and their boundaries, while the avoidant learns to tolerate intimacy and appreciate emotional closeness without retreating. Together, they create an environment where love is not conditional on chasing or fleeing, but is expressed through consistent care, empathy, and communication. This shift allows both individuals to experience the fullness of connection without the constant highs and lows of the push-pull dynamic, Security in a relationship doesn't mean the absence of challenges. It means having the confidence to navigate difficulties without fear of abandonment or loss of self. Both partners must recognize their triggers and work to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. The anxious partner must resist the urge to overcompensate or pursue excessively, while the avoidant must resist the urge to withdraw whenever emotions intensify. By understanding and respecting each other's emotional landscapes, they can replace fear-driven behavior with intentional, compassionate interaction. Ultimately, growth and healing require time, self-awareness, and honest communication. The anxious partner's love becomes a source of strength rather than anxiety, and the avoidant partner's independence becomes a space for secure connection rather than emotional distance. When both partners prioritize security over chaos, they create the conditions for a healthy, balanced, and sustainable relationship. The journey is not easy, and it requires courage from both sides to break old habits and embrace new ways of relating. But it is the only way to move beyond the cyclical patterns of chasing and withdrawing and toward genuine emotional fulfillment. In conclusion, understanding why avoidants return to anxious exes is not about blaming either side, but about recognizing the patterns of fear, longing, and unmet needs that drive human behavior. True growth and lasting love come when both partners cultivate self-awareness, set healthy boundaries, and choose security over the chaos of emotional cycles. By learning to balance independence with intimacy and reassurance with space, we can break the push-pull dynamic and create relationships that are grounded in respect, trust, and genuine connection. Thank you all for listening and taking the time to explore these emotional truths. May we all leave here with greater clarity, understanding, and the courage to build healthier, more fulfilling relationships.